The coffee stain. It was a rainy morning in San Francisco, and Sundar Pichai walked alone through the city, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans. There was no entourage, no chauffeur, no bodyguards, just a man trying to feel human again. For the past few weeks, his mind had been heavy with the decisions he had to make. Layoffs, budget cuts, pressure from the board, and people treating him like a machine. He longed for a normal moment, something real and unfiltered. As he entered a cozy, downtown coffee shop, the smell of roasted beans and baked croissants welcomed him. The place was packed with people buried in laptops and conversations. Sundar waited patiently in line, his eyes scanning the chalkboard menu. He didn't want anything fancy, just a black coffee. A reminder of the early days back when everything was simple. The barista behind the counter, a young man in his 20s, was stressed and visibly tired. Orders kept piling up. People were rushing. Someone had just spilled milk all over the counter, and the barista was cleaning it with shaky hands. He didn't even glance at Sundar when it was his turn. "What do you want?" the barista asked sharply without looking up. Sundar smiled politely. "Just a small black coffee, please." The barista finally looked up, annoyed, his brows furrowed. "That's it?" "Yes," Sundar replied gently. But then came the moment no one expected. Someone in the back of the line shouted, "Hey, that's Sundar Pichai, the Google CEO." The barista froze, his eyes narrowed. Then something shifted. Maybe it was anger at big tech, or maybe it was something personal. Either way, he leaned forward and asked with a mocking tone, "You're Sundar Pichai?" "Yes, I am," Sundar answered honestly. Without warning, the barista picked up a hot cup of coffee and threw it toward him. It splashed across Sundar's hoodie and chest, the heat making him wince. The entire cafe went silent. The sound of the cup hitting the floor echoed across the room. Gasps filled the air. "Get out of here," the barista shouted. "This place is for real people, not billionaires pretending to be one of us." People pulled out their phones. Some started recording. Others just stared in disbelief. Sundar stood still. The hot coffee soaked through his hoodie, but he didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. He didn't even frown. Instead, he looked the barista in the eye and said, "I'm sorry if something I did made you feel this way." His voice was soft, but it silenced the room even more. No one had expected that. They wanted drama, a reaction, a fight. But Sundar gave them grace. He turned around and walked out, his footsteps quiet and slow. People moved out of his way, unsure if they had just witnessed a scandal, or something much deeper. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sundar stood there, dripping in coffee, watching a mother help her child tie his shoelaces. A strange peace settled over him, even as humiliation burned on his clothes. But something inside him stirred. Not anger, not revenge. A decision. He looked back at the cafe window where the barista was now arguing with the manager. Sundar knew he had just been humiliated in front of the world. The video would be everywhere. But he also knew this moment wasn't an end. It was the beginning of something unexpected. Because sometimes pain is the doorway to purpose. And Sundar had just stepped through it. A face in the crowd. The napkin in Sundar's hand felt heavier than paper. It was folded awkwardly, damp at one corner from the coffee still dripping from his hoodie. He looked down at it, then at the little girl who had handed it to him. She couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. Her hair was tied in uneven pigtails. Her shoes were worn, and her eyes, those eyes, carried something most adults didn't understand. Not just sadness, but awareness. A quiet wisdom, born from struggle. She didn't flinch as he looked at her. Most children would have looked away. She held his gaze firm and brave. Her words echoed in his head. "My dad lost his job last week because of Google, but I don't think you're a bad man." Sundar knelt to her level. He didn't say anything right away. He didn't want to frighten her. He just wanted her to know he had heard her. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Mira," she replied, almost like a secret she was hesitant to share. "And your father?" he asked. "Is he here?" She pointed to a man sitting on a bench across the street, Sundar followed her finger and saw a man slouched forward, elbows on his knees, staring blankly at the ground. His beard was scruffy, his clothes too thin for the weather, and his hands looked like they had once done technical work, maybe in a lab or on a keyboard. His backpack resting by his foot had a Google Cloud sticker on it. Sundar recognized the kind. It was given to engineers during internal workshops. Without thinking, Sundar stood. He walked toward the man, every step filled with questions. What was his story? What went wrong? And more importantly, why didn't he know about it? The man noticed Sundar approaching and immediately tensed up. He looked away, then back again, unsure whether to be angry or embarrassed. Please, the man said sharply before Sundar could speak. I don't want your sympathy. I just came here to let my daughter feel normal for a few minutes. Sundar stopped in front of him. I'm not here to offer sympathy. I'm here to listen. The man scoffed. Listen? You have any idea what that word even means when you sit in glass offices with soundproof walls and billion-dollar decisions at your fingertips? Mira ran up and tugged her father's sleeve. Dad, he didn't yell. When the coffee hit him, he just said sorry. That made the man pause. His eyes softened, only for a second. What's your name? Sundar asked. Arjun, he replied. Former senior software engineer at Google Cloud. Until I wasn't needed anymore. He looked away, ashamed. Sundar sat beside him without asking. Arjun, Sundar began. Do you believe people in power care about what happens to the ones who fall through the cracks? No, Arjun said immediately. I don't blame you, Sundar said. But I want to. Arjun turned toward him now, his anger slowly fading, replaced by a bitter curiosity. Why? Guilt? Because something happened to me today that stripped away the last layer of protection I had, Sundar said quietly. I was humiliated in public, not by a protest or a journalist, by a barista with a grudge. And instead of feeling angry, I felt relief, because it reminded me that I'm not above pain. And maybe I've forgotten too many people who are still living in it. Arjun's eyes flickered. He didn't speak. Tell me everything, Sundar said. I want to understand. Arjun hesitated, then began to speak. His voice was low, strained, by months of frustration. He told Sundar how he'd been working 60-hour weeks, hitting targets, mentoring interns, staying up during on-call rotations. He had missed family dinners, school events, and even his wedding anniversary, all to meet project deadlines. And then one day, an email arrived, automated, emotionless. His position was no longer required. No explanation, no transition, just a link to a severance package. I begged for a meeting, Arjun said. I begged just to talk to someone human, but there was no one left. Just HR bots and silence. Sundar listened, eyes steady. Every word hit him harder than the last. Arjun continued. We lost our apartment, we moved in with my cousin. Mira had to change schools, we eat at shelters sometimes. And I'm a man who built cloud infrastructure for the most powerful tech company in the world. His voice cracked on the last sentence. Sundar felt a lump rise in his throat. It wasn't just the story, it was the pattern. Arjun wasn't the only one. There were thousands like him. And today, for the first time, one of them had a face, a name, and a daughter who still believed in kindness. Arjun, Sundar said after a long silence. Will you come with me to the office tomorrow? Arjun blinked. To Google? Yes. Why? Because someone needs to hear your story besides me. They fired me, Sundar. What do you think is going to happen? Maybe nothing, Sundar admitted. Maybe they won't care, but maybe they will. Maybe someone up there has also forgotten what it feels like to be down here. Arjun looked at Mira. Her small hand was wrapped around his, eyes full of silent hope. He sighed. Okay, I'll come. But not for me. For her. The invisible door, the glass doors of the Google campus were clean enough to reflect a distorted version of reality. 3 people standing at the edge of power, holding nothing but their truth. Sundar stood in front, not as a CEO today, but as a man attempting to remember who he once was. Arjun stood beside him, hesitant, unsure if this was a trap or an act of mercy. Little Mira gripped her father's hand with quiet trust, watching everything with wide, alert eyes. The security guard, still recovering from his realization, stepped aside. "Sir, please go ahead. I'm truly sorry, I just didn't recognize you." Sundar gave him a faint smile, but there was no anger in his expression, only something softer, more complicated. "That's all right. Sometimes even I forget who I'm supposed to be." As they stepped through the entry gate, the world inside seemed impossibly polished. Glass walls, robotic delivery pods gliding past, teams of well-dressed engineers heading toward bright meeting rooms with virtual whiteboards and espresso bars. The smell of success was everywhere. Success and the pressure to pretend everything was fine. But Sundar noticed something else, something he hadn't seen before. Tired eyes behind polished glasses, forced smiles behind casual laughter. People, moving quickly, but without peace. Arjun looked around with a strange mix of nostalgia and pain. This place used to feel like home. Now it just looks like a high-tech museum I'm not allowed to walk through. Mira whispered. "Daddy? Why, do people look like they're here but not really here?" Sundar glanced down at her. "That's a very good question, Mira." They made their way toward the central building. Sundar didn't alert his assistant. He didn't schedule a formal meeting. He wanted this to be raw, real. A surprise not just to the leadership team, but to himself. When they entered the executive floor, silence followed them like a shadow. Heads turned. Someone dropped a pen. Another person stared in disbelief. Sundar didn't stop walking. He moved with quiet purpose until he reached a large meeting room where a dozen directors were gathered around a table discussing growth charts and quarterly targets. "Good morning," Sundar said as he entered. Everyone froze. Some stood up, automatically confused by the unexpected visit. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything urgent." The head of operations, a sharp woman named Elena, spoke first. "Not at all, sir. We were just reviewing projected cost-saving strategies and—" "Perfect," Sundar said, motioning for Arjun and Mira to step forward. "This is Arjun. He was part of the team that built our cloud resilience model 2 years ago. He was let go last week. No one explained why. He never got a real chance to speak, so today he will." The room fell into an awkward silence. Arjun stood stiffly. His hands trembled slightly. Mira squeezed them tighter. For a moment, he looked like he might turn and run, but then he took a deep breath. "Thank you, Sundar," he began. "I didn't come here for pity, and I don't need my job back. I came here so anyone in this building remembers what it's like to fall." He looked around the room, at people who had the power to end careers with a spreadsheet, who hadn't missed a paycheck in decades. "I gave 5 years of my life to this company," Arjun said. "I worked nights, weekends, holidays. Not because anyone forced me, but because I believed in what we were building. I thought we were changing the world. I thought that meant something." Someone coughed nervously. Another executive looked down, avoiding his gaze. "But then the layoffs came," Arjun continued. "And instead of a conversation, I got an email. Instead of a thank you, I got a severance link, and when I reached out, there was no one. Not a single human response. I became invisible overnight. To you, I was just one line in a cost-cutting report." Mira leaned her head against her father's arm. Her presence made the moment unbearable for some. "Do you know what it feels like to have your daughter ask why you're not smart enough to work at the place you told her was magical?" Arjun's voice cracked. "Do you know how painful it is to explain to a child that sometimes even being good isn't good enough?" The silence was heavier now. Even Elena, known for her steel composure, looked shaken. Sundar stepped forward. "Thank you, Arjun. You've said what many have wanted to say but didn't have the chance or the courage to." But you shouldn't have had to walk back in this building to be heard. He turned toward the team. We've built something extraordinary, Sundar said. But somewhere along the way we lost sight of what made it human. We became efficient, scalable, untouchable, and now, people like Arjun pay the price. He walked slowly across the room, speaking not like a CEO giving a speech, but like a father trying to be honest. We talk about innovation, he said. But what's truly innovative is remembering that every line of code has a person behind it. Every product has a story, and every layoff has a family on the other side. Elena finally spoke, her voice subdued. What do you want us to do, Sundar? Not for me, he replied. For Arjun. For the people who are still here but feel like ghosts. I want us to build a task force. Not a committee, not a form. A real task force that brings back those we let go too easily. Not just to rehire, but to hear them, support them, learn from them. This company can afford it. And more importantly, we owe it. Arjun looked stunned. But why? He asked. Because the real wealth of any company, Sundar said, is not its stock price. It's the people who still believe in it after you've failed them. When silence speaks the next morning, the world woke up to headlines that no one saw coming. Google CEO brings fired engineer back to headquarters in surprise meeting. Sundar Pichai calls for task force to re-examine layoffs. Emotional moment. Little girl watches her father speak truth to power. News channels picked it up. Social media exploded. Video clips of Arjun's speech and Sundar standing silently beside him spread across every platform. People weren't just watching, they were feeling it. And in an age of noise, that meant something. Back in his modest apartment, Arjun sat on the edge of his worn-out couch, staring at the phone. It wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from former co-workers, distant relatives, journalists, even strangers. Many were kind, some were angry. A few were simply overwhelmed. Mira sat beside him, drawing a picture of the office building with crayons, carefully placing her daddy and the nice man, as she called Sundar, in front of it. She looked up and asked, "Daddy, do you think they believed you?" Arjun didn't answer right away. He looked at the screen, then at his daughter's hopeful eyes. I think they heard me. And sometimes that's the first step to being believed." Across town, Sundar sat alone in his office. For the first time in weeks, he had locked the door, silenced the calls, and just allowed himself to sit in stillness. The echo of Arjun's words from the day before clung to the air like a memory refusing to leave. I thought we were changing the world. I thought that meant something. Those words weren't just about Google. They were about him. Somewhere, over the years, the mission had become a machine. It still produced wonders, but it rarely paused to feel the cost. He had always prided himself on being the kind of CEO who listened. But now he had to face the hardest truth of all. He had been listening through walls, through filters, through layers of carefully crafted updates. But not with his heart. He picked up a pen and wrote on a blank notepad, something he hadn't done in ages. He wrote, "Real change does not come from power. It comes from proximity to pain." And he circled it. He needed to see someone, not a fellow executive, not a journalist, someone else, someone he hadn't thought about since the coffee shop incident. He reached for his phone and dialed the manager of the cafe. "I need to speak with one of your employees," Sundar said. "The barista who threw the coffee," the manager stammered. "Sir, we fired him that day. I'm sorry, we didn't know it was you. And that kind of behavior." "Where is he now?" Sundar asked, cutting him off. There was a pause, then a reluctant reply. "I don't know. He didn't come to collect his paycheck, but someone mentioned he's been sleeping in his car." Sundar hung up without another word. 3 hours later, under a dull gray sky in a forgotten parking lot behind an old gas station, Sundar found the barista. He was sitting on the hood of a dented sedan, staring blankly at nothing. A hoodie covered half his face and his hands trembled slightly. Not from cold, but from exhaustion and shame. A worn duffel bag sat beside him. A copy of a local newspaper lay crumpled at his feet, with a photo of Sundar and Arjun on the front page. The barista looked up as Sundar approached, His eyes widened in disbelief, then dropped instantly. You, he said quietly. Why are you here? To ask the same question, Sundar replied, standing just a few feet away. Why did you throw the coffee? The man didn't answer. Instead, he let out a breath that sounded like a slow collapse. Because I was angry, he muttered. And scared, and tired. And you were the closest thing to blame. Blame for what? For my brother? He worked in your supply team. He was laid off 6 months ago. Couldn't find work, got depressed. One day he didn't come home. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie, voice cracking. We found him 2 days later. They said it was an accident, but I know. It wasn't. It was a slow death. And the last push came from a system that didn't care. Sundar's throat tightened. He stepped forward slowly, his voice lower now. What was his name? Jay? He believed in you, you know. Had your picture as his wallpaper. Told me you were different. That you actually cared. The barista laughed, bitterly. When I saw you walk in that day, I thought, maybe he was wrong. Maybe he wasn't, Sundar said. Because I'm here. The barista looked up, confused. You were fired, Sundar continued. But I don't think justice is served by ending your story where it broke. I want to offer you something, not as a CEO, as a man trying to make something right. He pulled out a card from his pocket. There's a grief support network founded by a friend of mine. They need passionate people who've lived through loss. They help families navigate joblessness, grief, identity loss, and they pay well. I think you'd be good there. The barista looked at the card but didn't take it. Why are you helping me? He asked. Sundar sat on the edge of the hood beside him. Because yesterday a little girl gave me a napkin when the world gave me silence. Because today a father gave me truth when most people give me praise. And because you gave me something I didn't know I needed. A mirror. A long pause filled the air. Finally, the barista took the card. His hands shook, but his voice steadied. I don't forgive myself yet, but maybe this helps. Healing isn't about forgetting, Sundar said. It's about remembering, in a way that no longer breaks you. The forgotten promise for most people, emails were just digital noise, words that came and went like traffic passing on a highway. But this one was different. It was quiet, simple and powerful in a way that pierced Sundar's carefully built mental armor. You don't remember me, but I remember you. I helped you pass your engineering exam once. Now I'm asking for your help. Not for me, but for someone you promised you'd never forget. He stared at the screen, the words swimming slightly, not because of the backlight, but because of what they unlocked. A forgotten door in his memory creaked open. And there, in the quiet hallway of his mind, stood a girl from his past. He remembered, her face now Mira. Not Mira, the child he had just met, but Mira, the student. Back then she was brilliant, quiet and often overlooked by the professors, but not by him. They had studied together during their final year at IAT. When he struggled with linear algebra, she had stayed back with him after class, drawing diagrams on dusty blackboards, repeating concepts until he understood. She never asked for anything in return. Except once, on the last day before graduation, Mira had looked at him and said with a soft laugh, If you ever get rich and powerful, and if I ever fall, promise you'll remember to pull me up. He had smiled and nodded, not realizing that promises made in passing can echo for decades. He opened her email. Attached was a short story, Mira's story. After working her way through college scholarships and night jobs, she had become a brilliant AI researcher, eventually joining Google's ethical AI team. She had led a quiet but important internal study, highlighting algorithmic bias and its impact on marginalized communities. She had raised her voice, politely but persistently, and one day, her badge stopped working. No explanation, no cause, no appeal. Her inbox was shut down, her project folder deleted, like she had never existed. She ended the email with a single line. If your promise meant anything, I'll be at the old university library this Friday. I'll wait for 1 hour. If you remember, you'll come. If you don't, I'll understand. Friday, 1 day away. Sundar leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him, not unlike his conscience. How many Miras had disappeared in silence? How many had fought from within only to be erased without a sound? He booked a flight immediately. No assistant, no team. Just a message left with the new internal task force. I'll be unavailable for 24 hours. Prioritize stories involving ethics, AI, and internal silence. The next morning, as the plane descended over the old city that had shaped him, his heart began to pound. Not with fear, but with the weight of memory. The campus hadn't changed much. The same rusted gates, the same uneven footpaths, the same scent of ambition mixed with dust and jasmine from nearby trees. He walked toward the library, his steps slow, deliberate. And there she was. Mira sat on the library steps, her hair streaked with gray now, but her eyes as sharp as he remembered. She was wearing a simple cotton sari, a notebook on her lap, a thermos beside her. She looked up as he approached. She didn't smile. "So you remembered," she said. "Barely," he replied, half smiling. "But enough to know I had to come." She nodded and moved over slightly, making room on the step beside her. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that comes only between people who once knew each other well. "You rose," she said, "and I vanished." "You didn't vanish," Sundar said. "You were erased. There's a difference." "Erased," she repeated. "Funny word, isn't it? Sounds clean, clinical, like it didn't hurt." He looked at her hands, folded in her lap. "Why didn't you fight louder?" She turned her head. "You know why. Women who shout get labeled angry. Researchers who question authority get labeled difficult. And both of those together?" She smiled bitterly. "They get erased." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't want an apology," she replied. "I want a platform. I want the chance to finish what I started. I want the world to see that ethical technology isn't just a checkbox. It's the soul of innovation." Sundar looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, he felt not like a CEO, but like a student again. "Then come back," he said. "But this time not under the radar. I want you to lead a new initiative, an internal council on ethical AI with real power. Your name, your rules. No more erasures." She laughed softly. "They won't like that." "Good," he said. "That means it's worth doing." The sun dipped lower behind the old building, casting long shadows across the steps. "One condition," Mira said. "Anything. Don't let this be about redemption. Let it be about restoration." Echoes in the system, the next few days moved like a storm beneath the surface. Quiet to the world, loud behind closed doors. Inside Google's headquarters, a new kind of tension was building. Not from market pressures or product delays, but from truth clawing its way out of buried archives. The task force Sundar had quietly commissioned was growing by the hour. It was no longer just engineers and HR liaisons. Ethicists, former employees, anonymous internal sources, everyone who had been silently waiting for someone to ask the right questions had started speaking. Emails surfaced, archived meeting notes, unexplained dismissals. In some cases, code contributions stripped of names, rebranded under others. Voices once discarded were now being documented. And at the heart of it all was one common thread. Ethical resistance had not been destroyed. It had simply been ignored. Sundar read the reports each night like confessionals. Stories of employees who challenged flawed systems, spoke up about racial bias in hiring algorithms, or questioned the silence around internal misconduct. Some had been demoted, others reassigned. A few, like Mira, had just vanished from the company map entirely. His office felt colder now, not physically, but emotionally. The polished glass windows no longer reflected success. They reflected responsibility. He knew the world would eventually find out. And when they did, they would ask, "Why didn't you know?" But now he did, and that meant he had to act. He called a global all-hands meeting. No press, no filters, just raw transmission broadcast internally to every office, every remote team, every contractor. As the broadcast began, millions of eyes watched Sundar stand at the center of a simple stage. No fancy graphics behind him, just one word on the screen. Listen. He stood silently for a moment before speaking. That silence, intentional, uncomfortable, was the beginning. I failed, he began softly. Not in business, not in innovation, but in humanity. He looked into the camera, his eyes clear. Over the past decade, we built machines that can understand language, predict behavior, even write poetry, but we failed to listen to the people inside the system. Those who dared to speak truth. Those who reminded us that technology without ethics is just power without conscience. The room remained still, not even a whisper. We have discovered patterns, he continued. Dismissals that weren't just performance-based, files that were erased, voices that were buried. I will not list names out of respect, but know this. The people who were once called troublemakers will now be known as truth-tellers. He paused. Effective immediately, a new ethics council will be formed, led by Meera Sen, whose story reminded me what real leadership looks like. This council will operate independently. Their reports will be public, and their decisions will be binding. The crowd watching remotely was still, breath held. And to those who were harmed by our silence, I say this, we see you now. And we are not just sorry. We are going to rebuild, so that no one like you is ever erased again. He stepped away from the podium, and the screen faded to black. Months later, the energy across the company had shifted. Meera's ethics council was not just active, it was feared and respected. Hiring practices changed. AI projects were paused and reviewed. Employees had anonymous channels to report internal problems without retaliation. And one by one, people who had been dismissed unfairly were being contacted, not with apologies, but with honest conversations. Arjun had accepted a consultant position, helping to build new internal support systems for employees. Meera, his daughter, became a quiet symbol within the office, a reminder that behind every email, every badge, every line of code, there's a family. As for the barista, he had taken the job Sundar offered. He now worked with grieving families, through the ethics outreach program, helping others who had been displaced by systems too big to care. He didn't talk about what he had done to Sundar, but he carried that moment as a lesson, not about regret, but about change. And Sundar, he remained CEO, but different now. He walked the halls more often. He sat in cafeterias quietly, not to be seen, but to see. Sometimes he even returned to the cafe where it all began. Not for coffee, just to feel. One afternoon, as he walked past the main building, he noticed a wall installation under construction. It featured the faces of people who had once been overlooked, Meera, Arjun, a few unnamed others, not for decoration, for remembrance. A plaque beside the wall read, "These are the ones who reminded us what silence costs." He stood before it for a long time. Then, from behind, a child's voice called out, "Mr. Sundar." He turned. It was Meera, holding up a drawing. "I made this in school," she said, grinning. He took the paper and looked at it. It was a stick figure drawing of 3 people standing on a stage. A tall man, a girl, and a woman with books in her hand. Above their heads, written in bold, childish letters, were the words, "Heroes don't wear suits. They fix broken things." He knelt and hugged her. And in that moment, under the sunlight with the noise of the world fading behind them, Sundar Pichai realized something simple and undeniable. Redemption doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being willing to change. He nodded slowly. "Deal."